My sister grabbed a cake knife at her own baby shower, pointed it at my pregnant belly, and screamed, "This is my day." When I told her to calm down, she snarled, "You stole my life and my baby's." I just stared at her. That was 9 months ago. Last week, police found a fully furnished nursery and a storage unit with my twins' names painted on the walls. I was walking across the stage of Buffalo University, ready to collect my degree, when I heard my sister scream at the top of her lungs. Jessica had collapsed to the floor and was hyperventilating. The entire ceremony was shut down. Paramedics rushed in. You see, she'd always been an attention-seeking hoe. During my first piano recital when I was 12, she fainted in the front row. Prom night when I was crowned queen, fake heart attack scare, every single monumental event. And it wasn't until 3 years later when I got the invite to her baby shower that I finally saw an opportunity to bite back. My husband was beside me when I opened it, and I immediately started rubbing up against him. "We're trying for a baby," I whispered into his ear. "Really? I thought we were waiting now." "We're trying now." The math was specific. I had maybe 3 cycles to get pregnant for the timing to work. Her party was in 3 months. I had to act fast. First test, negative. I stared at that single line. Second month, negative again. I was lying in the dark room with gel on my belly when the ultrasound tech went quiet. "Move the wand around." "Congratulations, it's twins." I laughed. Actually laughed. The next few months, I became Jessica's biggest cheerleader. Anything to get her hyped up for what that hoe thought would be her big moment. "Oh my gosh, girl. You need a countdown on Instagram. I'll design it." I posted daily. 5 months until my sister becomes a mom, I insisted on inviting everyone I knew, promising that they'd all bring her gifts and attention. I knew I was doing the right thing when she posted her baby name online. Serafina Rose, a name I'd written in my diary when I was 15, a name I'd never told a soul about. That beach had gone through my room. So, when the morning of her party arrived, I smiled extra sweet while curling her hair. And when she started getting all emotional, it took everything not to burst out laughing. If only one of us got to be pregnant. I'm glad it's me. Even Mom said it's better this way since I'm the prettier sister. The photos will actually be worth framing. You know what I mean? I applied her lipstick carefully. "You deserve this." "No interruptions this time," she responded. "This is my day." "Absolutely." Well, if there's one thing my beach sister can do, it's to plan a good party. There were beautiful balloons everywhere, a 3-tier cake. Even though everyone already knew from her post it was a girl, she insisted on doing the whole reveal performance again. I wore a loose dress, but you could see my bump if you looked hard enough. Nobody was looking at me though. Not yet. Or so I thought until Jessica pulled our mom aside. "God, look at Emily. She's gotten huge." If I didn't know better, I'd think she was the pregnant one. Mom laughed. "Well, you've always been the thin one, honey. Good thing too for the photos." When they were finally done giggling, the countdown started. 3, 2, 1 pop. Pink confetti everywhere. "It's a girl!" Jessica screamed. Everyone cheered. Cameras flashed. TBH. I was ready to stand up and ruin the entire mood with my announcement. But that's when my morning sickness hit hard. I ran to the bathroom, hand over mouth. When I came back out, everyone was staring at me with concern. The words came tumbling out. Sorry, I said, flustered. "It's just the twins. They've been making me so sick. 6 weeks with twins, and I can't keep anything down." The silence was deafening. Then the explosion. "Twins?" Aunt Clara shrieked. "Oh my gosh, Emily." The crowd shifted like a tide away from Jessica toward me. Hands reached for my belly. Questions bombarded me from every direction. "When did you find out? Do twins run in your family? Are they identical?" Jessica's face went from pink to red to purple. I watched her chest start heaving. I braced myself for the performance. I can't breathe," she gasped, clutching her chest. "Someone help." But everyone was around me. Even her own husband was asking me about twin strollers. "Hello?" Jessica screamed. "I'm having a panic attack. This is my party." Mom glanced over, annoyed. "Jessica, honey, not now. Emily's having twins." At her first pregnancy? That's when Jessica lost it. Actually lost it. She grabbed the cake knife, and for a second I thought this was how I'd die. Death by baby shower. "This is my day." She screamed, mascara running. "Mine. I've been trying for 3 years." James grabbed Jessica's wrist and twisted the knife out of her hand while she stood there frozen, her whole body shaking like she was having a seizure. The knife clattered onto the floor and kicked under the dessert table as Jessica's legs gave out completely. She dropped to her knees and started wailing so loud that the neighbors probably heard it 3 houses down. Her mascara ran down her face in thick black streams while she pounded her fists on the floor, screaming that I ruined everything, that I always ruin everything, that this was supposed to be her special day. Mom rushed over and wrapped her arms around Jessica, rocking her back and forth while completely ignoring me standing there in shock with my hand on my belly. At least 20 phones were pointed at us, everyone recording the whole meltdown like it was some kind of reality show. James managed to get Jessica into a chair where she sat hyperventilating, her chest heaving up and down so fast I thought she might pass out. He whispered something in her ear over and over, probably trying to calm her down, while the rest of the guests just stood around awkwardly, not knowing where to look or what to do. Michael grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the door, his face completely white. He asked if I was okay and said we needed to leave right now before things got worse. That's when Mom stormed over and slapped me hard across the face, the sound echoing through the whole room like a gunshot. She screamed that I was a selfish who couldn't let Jessica have one single day without making it about me. The room went dead silent except for Jessica's crying, and I heard several people gasp at what just happened. My cheek burned like fire and I touched it without thinking, feeling the heat spreading across my face. Michael stepped right between Mom and me, telling her to back the hell off or he'd call the cops himself. Laura appeared next to me and announced loud enough for everyone to hear that she was calling 911 if anyone else laid a hand on me. Robert finally pushed through the crowd, looking like he'd seen a ghost, staring at what his family had turned into. That's when Jessica suddenly bent over and threw up all over the floor, this gross yellow liquid splashing onto her expensive shoes. James jumped up, saying they needed to go to the hospital right now because she was having contractions from all the stress. Mom immediately pointed at me and yelled that if Jessica lost her baby, it would be my fault, her voice carrying across the entire backyard. James helped Jessica stand up and started walking her toward their car, but she turned around and screamed that if she lost her baby, she'd make sure I lost mine too. At least 10 people had their phones out recording her threat, and Michael grabbed my hand saying we were filing a police report immediately. We sat in Michael's car in the parking lot while he called 911 to report the assault and the threat against our babies. I texted Laura asking her to save any videos from the party while my cheek throbbed and I could feel the twins moving around like crazy from all my stress. 2 cops showed up about 20 minutes later and took our statements, watching the footage Laura and 3 other guests had saved on their phones. They took pictures of my red cheek and told us we should file for a restraining order first thing Monday morning. 3 hours later, we were home and Michael was making me chamomile tea while I sat on the couch trying to process everything that had happened. He sat down next to me and admitted he was scared of what Jessica might do next, suggesting we should stay with his parents for a few days just to be safe. I told him no way was I letting her drive me out of my own home after everything she'd done over the years. My phone started blowing up with notifications as videos from the party went viral on TikTok and Instagram, with hashtags like baby shower meltdown and psycho sister. Comments poured in calling Jessica crazy and mom abusive, while other people said I was wrong for announcing my pregnancy at her party, even if she had it coming. The doorbell started going off at 7 the next morning like someone was holding it down. Michael jumped out of bed and looked through the peephole while I stayed under the covers. Susan stood there with her face all red and puffy from crying. She kept pressing the doorbell over and over and started pounding on the door with her fist. Michael told me to stay back and open the door just a crack with the chain still on. Susan immediately stuck her fingers through the gap and tried to push it open while screaming about the videos. She demanded I come to the door and take everything down right now. Her voice got louder and louder until she was basically shrieking about how I'd ruined Jessica's life and destroyed our family. Michael kept his shoulder against the door and told her she needed to leave. Susan started kicking the door and screaming that I was a monster who'd always been jealous of my sister. The neighbors started coming out of their apartments to see what was happening. Mrs. Lee from next door stood in her bathrobe recording everything on her phone. Susan saw all the people watching and started yelling even louder about how I'd planned everything to hurt Jessica. She said I was evil and had always wanted to destroy my sister's happiness. Michael finally told her he was calling the police if she didn't leave immediately. How did Jessica know about that diary name from when Emily was 15? That means she must have been sneaking through Emily's stuff for years. I wonder if the twins moving around during all that stress is normal or if babies can really feel. Susan backed away from the door but kept screaming from the hallway about how I'd regret this. She left after about 20 more minutes of yelling threats at our door. My phone rang an hour later with Robert's name on the screen. His voice sounded completely exhausted when I picked up. He said Jessica was still in the hospital under observation, and the doctors were worried about her blood pressure. He begged me to come to a family meeting to work this out before things got worse. I could hear the desperation in his voice when he asked me to please just talk to them. I told him I'd only meet if it was somewhere public, and Michael came with me. Robert agreed and said we could meet at the Italian place downtown in 2 days. Those 2 days passed slowly with my anxiety getting worse by the hour. I couldn't stop worrying that all this stress was hurting the twins. My hands shook as I made an emergency appointment with my OB/GYN. The waiting room was packed when we got there, and I noticed several women staring at me. One of them whispered to her friend and pointed at me with her phone out. They'd definitely seen the viral videos that were still spreading everywhere online. Dr. Martinez called me back and did a full exam with the ultrasound machine. She moved the wand around my belly for what felt like forever while checking both babies. The twins were fine, but she warned me this level of stress was dangerous for all of us. She prescribed something mild for anxiety and told me to avoid any more confrontations. 2 days later, we walked into the restaurant for the family meeting. Susan, Robert, Jessica, and James were already sitting at a big table in the back. Jessica looked pale and had dark circles under her eyes, but she'd clearly done her makeup carefully. The second we sat down, Susan started demanding I apologize for everything. She said I needed to admit I'd planned the whole thing to hurt Jessica. Jessica sat there playing victim and wiping fake tears while saying I'd always been jealous of her. She claimed I couldn't stand that she was prettier and more loved by everyone. James just sat there silently, but I saw him flinch when Jessica said that. Robert tried to calm everyone down and suggested we all just move forward peacefully. Susan kept cutting him off and raising her voice about how I'd traumatized her pregnant daughter. Other people in the restaurant started looking over at our our table, Jessica suddenly reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. She slid it across the table with this nasty smirk on her face. "I'm suing you for intentional infliction of emotional distress and endangering my baby." Her lawyer thought she had a really strong case and could get serious damages. Michael immediately pulled out his phone and called his cousin Sophie, who was a family lawyer. Jessica's face dropped when she heard him explaining the situation to an actual attorney. We left the restaurant with Susan still screaming threats behind us. That evening, Laura showed up at our door with wine for Michael and chocolate ice cream for me. She'd seen everything online and wanted to check if we were okay. She sat on our couch and pulled out her phone to show us something. Laura had kept a folder of screenshots going back years documenting Jessica's attention-seeking behavior. There were photos from my high school graduation where Jessica pretended to faint, screenshots from my college acceptance party where she claimed chest pains, posts from my engagement dinner where she had a sudden allergic reaction to nothing, events I'd completely forgotten about where Jessica had stolen the spotlight with fake emergencies. Laura had been quietly collecting evidence of this pattern for years without telling me. A week after the baby shower, Michael's cousin Sophie came over to review Jessica's lawsuit. She read through the papers and actually started laughing at how ridiculous it was. Sophie said it was completely frivolous and would get thrown out immediately. She suggested we counter-sue for assault since Susan had slapped me at the party. We could also sue for the threats Jessica made about our babies being recorded on video. Sophie helped us prepare all the documentation we'd need for court. Having real legal support finally helped me sleep through the night for the first time since the party. We went to the county courthouse the next week to file for a restraining order. Sophie came with us and brought printed screenshots of the threatening messages and videos from the party. The judge reviewed everything, including witness statements from the neighbors about Susan's screaming fit. He granted a temporary restraining order prohibiting both Susan and Jessica from coming within 500 FT of us. The order specifically covered our home, Michael's workplace, and my doctor's office. Susan violated the restraining order within 48 hours by showing up at Michael's office building. She walked right past security and started screaming at the receptionist to let her see Michael. Security grabbed her and called the police while she fought and screamed about me destroying her family. The police arrested her and took her away in handcuffs while Michael's co-workers watched from the windows. His boss called him into a meeting and suggested working from home until this situation was resolved. Michael set up his office in our spare bedroom and started working remotely the next day. I woke up at 3 in the morning a few nights later to weird noises outside our bedroom window. My heart started racing as I crept over to peek through the blinds. Jessica's car was parked across the street just barely beyond the 500T limit. She was sitting in the driver's seat staring directly at our apartment building. I watched her for 20 minutes and she never moved or looked away from our windows. She stayed there for 3 more hours just watching our home in the darkness. Michael installed security cameras the next morning covering every angle of our building. 2 weeks passed with Jessica parking just outside the camera range every single night. Robert showed up at our door on a Tuesday afternoon looking like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were bloodshot, and his shirt was wrinkled like he'd worn it for 3 days straight. He slumped onto our couch and rubbed his face with both hands. Susan had been staying at their house since the baby shower and was driving James absolutely crazy with her constant rants about me. Robert said James was thinking about filing for divorce because Jessica's obsession with destroying me was making her sick during her pregnancy. The stress was affecting their baby, and James couldn't take it anymore. 3 days later, I went in for my 20-wee anatomy scan at the hospital. The ultrasound tech moved the wand around my belly for what felt like forever without saying anything. Dr. Martinez came in and took over, measuring each twin over and over again. One twin was smaller than the other and needed closer monitoring every week from now on. The stress was literally affecting my baby's growth, and I couldn't stop the tears from coming. Michael held me while I sobbed in that cold, dark room with gel still on my belly. That night, Laura called me in a panic while I was lying in bed. Someone had posted my medical information all over a local mom Facebook group, my doctor's name, the address of the clinic, even my appointment times for the next month. The post had screenshots of my medical chart showing I was having twins and my due date. Only someone with access to the hospital system could have gotten those records. Michael immediately called hospital security while I called our lawyer on speakerphone. The lawyer said this was a serious federal crime and we needed to document everything right away. Sophie called me the next morning with shocking news she discovered through her contacts at the medical center. Robert's wife, Karen, worked in the billing department and had been accessing my records illegally for weeks. The hospital's IT department found her login accessing my files 17 times in the past month. Karen was escorted out by security that same afternoon and faced immediate termination. The hospital administrator called to apologize and said they were cooperating fully with the criminal investigation. Robert showed up at our door again that evening, completely devastated by what Karen had done. He had no idea she'd been helping Jessica and felt betrayed by his own wife. The next day, I got a text from James that made my hands shake as I read it. He was apologizing for Jessica's behavior and admitted she'd been keeping a notebook since high school filled with ways to destroy me. He'd found it hidden in their closet with pages and pages of plans dating back years. James was scared for their baby and was meeting with a custody lawyer the next morning. He offered to testify on our behalf if we needed him in court against against Jessica. 3 weeks after the baby shower, everything exploded online when Jessica posted a completely made-up story on Facebook. She claimed I'd been stalking her for months, and included photos she'd edited to make it look like I was following her. The post had fake text messages she'd created showing me threatening her and her baby. Within hours, the post had been shared hundreds of times in Buffalo mom groups. Strangers started sending me death threats through Facebook and Instagram. Someone posted our home address in the comments saying, "I deserved whatever happened to me." Michael contacted the FBI that afternoon about the cyberstalking and death threats. They took it seriously and said they'd open an investigation into the harassment campaign. Meanwhile, my blood pressure kept climbing higher at every doctor visit. Dr. Martinez put me on modified bed rest and said I couldn't leave the house except for medical appointments. The twin size difference was getting worse, and she was worried about early delivery. Being trapped at home while Jessica spread lies about me online felt like being in prison. I'm really wondering how Karen got involved in all this. Did Jessica convince her to help? Or was it Robert's mom, Susan, who pulled her in? The way the hospital caught her accessing those files 17 times makes me think about what exactly I watched from bed as the hate comments poured in on every social media platform. Laura started taking screenshots of everything for a defamation lawsuit she was helping us file. She documented every lie, every threat, every piece of harassment for our legal team. Michael took time off work to stay home and take care of me full-time. He brought me breakfast in bed every morning and sat next to me reading to the twins. He'd put his hands on my belly and tell them how much we loved them already. His voice was the only thing keeping me sane while our world fell apart around us. 2 days later, the police showed up at our door with news about Karen. She was being arrested for the HIPAA violations and faced up to 10 years in federal prison. The investigation revealed she'd been feeding Jessica information about my pregnancy for months. She'd sent Jessica copies of my ultrasounds, my blood work results, even my weight at each appointment. Robert filed for divorce that same day, disgusted by what Karen had done to our family. The family was completely broken apart, with everyone taking sides and pointing fingers. A month after the baby shower, I was sitting by my bedroom window when I saw a process server walking up to our door. My heart sank as Michael answered and took the thick envelope of papers. Jessica was suing both of us for alienation of affection and conspiracy to ruin her reputation. She was also suing for emotional distress and claimed we'd turned her family against her on purpose. The lawsuit demanded $500,000 in damages plus legal fees. We were already spending thousands on our lawyer for the restraining order and criminal cases. Now we needed a civil attorney too, and the bills were piling up faster than we could pay them. Sophie called that night and told me to come to her office first thing in the morning. I sat across from her desk while she spread out papers and started making lists. She filed 3 separate lawsuits against Jessica for defamation, emotional distress, and harassment. She pressed criminal charges against Susan for the assault at the baby shower. She warned me this could take months or even years to resolve, but we had to fight back. 2 weeks later, I woke up at 3 in the morning with sharp pains shooting through my belly. Michael drove me to the hospital while I gripped the door handle and tried to breathe through the contractions. The nurse hooked me up to monitors and called Dr. Martinez, who rushed in, still wearing his pajama pants under his white coat. He gave me shots to stop the labor and explained the twins wouldn't survive if they came now at 24 weeks. I stayed in the hospital for 3 days on bed rest while the contractions slowly stopped. Jessica posted on Facebook about karma catching up to me while I was still hooked up to the monitors. James showed up at my hospital room the second day with flowers hidden under his jacket. He sat in the chair next to my bed and apologized for everything that had happened. He told me Jessica had been prescribed medication for her mental health, but refused to take it. He was documenting everything for their divorce and keeping records of her behavior. 6 weeks after the baby shower, Laura organized what she called a support rally at our house. Cars filled our street, and people I hadn't seen since college showed up with casseroles and baby gifts. My coworkers brought diapers and our neighbors set up tables in the backyard. Everyone was talking about how crazy Jessica and Susan had become with their social media posts. We were all in the backyard when we heard screaming from the front yard. Jessica stood on our lawn, 8 months pregnant, yelling that I was turning everyone against her. Laura tried to guide her back to her car, but Jessica pushed her away. That's when liquid splashed onto the grass and Jessica grabbed her belly. The ambulance arrived 15 minutes later while she screamed that I had caused her to go into early labor. The next morning, Michael and I sat at the kitchen table in silence while our phones buzzed with messages. Everyone was talking about how Jessica had delivered a healthy baby girl at the hospital. I felt relief that the baby was okay, even after everything that had happened between us. Susan called my phone that afternoon and her voice was pure poison. She said Jessica had named the baby Serafina Rose Emily, adding my name just to spite me. James texted me that he was refusing to sign the birth certificate until Jessica agreed to counseling. 2 months after the original baby shower, Laura threw me another one at her house. I was opening presents when a process server walked up and handed me papers. Jessica was seeking a restraining order against me, claiming I had caused her premature labor. The judge assigned to our case went to Susan's church, and Sophie was furious about the conflict of interest. Despite all our evidence and Sophie's arguments, the judge granted Jessica's restraining order against me. We couldn't be within 500 FT of each other, which would make our upcoming court dates complicated. Sophie immediately filed for recusal and started the appeal process, but it would take weeks. That night, I lay in bed, feeling the twins kick and roll inside me. Michael held me while I cried about what kind of world we were bringing our babies into. We were both exhausted from the constant legal battles and emotional warfare with my family. 10 weeks passed, with lawyers filing papers back and forth while I grew bigger every day. Laura showed up at my door one morning carrying a dusty cardboard box from her garage. She'd saved all our childhood photos from when Susan threw them out years ago. I sat on the couch, spreading them across the coffee table while she made tea in my kitchen. There was Jessica and me at age 5 and 6. Arms around each other at the beach, both missing front teeth and grinning. Another showed us in matching Halloween costumes she'd begged me to wear with her. Photo after photo of two little girls who actually loved each other once. My hands shook as I picked up one from my 8th birthday, where Jessica was helping me blow out candles. Her face lit up with genuine happiness for me. Laura sat down and rubbed my back while I cried. This wasn't about a baby shower or even favoritism anymore. This was mental illness destroying what used to be a real relationship. James called that same afternoon with news that made my blood run cold. He'd filed for emergency custody of baby Serafina after finding a notebook where Jessica had written, "Destroy Emily," over and over for 20 pages. She'd also been refusing to take her prescribed medication and had missed 3 psychiatrist appointments. The judge granted his petition immediately based on the evidence. When the custody officer showed up at Susan's house to serve the papers, Jessica completely lost it. She grabbed Serafina and ran to her car while Susan blocked the officer's path. They disappeared before anyone could stop them. James was at the police station within an hour, filing a missing person report for his daughter. The Amber Alert went out that evening with Serafina's photo and descriptions of both Jessica and Susan. I sat glued to my phone watching for updates while Michael paced our living room on the phone with Sophie. Every news alert made my heart race. Around midnight, the police found them at a motel 2 towns over after someone recognized them from the alert. Both women were arrested on the spot for custodial interference. The news footage showed Jessica screaming and fighting the officers while Susan yelled about persecution. Baby Serafina was returned safely to James, who held her like he'd never let go again. Sophie called us into her office 3 days later to discuss the mounting charges. She spread files across her desk showing assault, threats, harassment, and now kidnapping charges between them. The prosecutor was pushing for serious jail time given the pattern of escalation. Sophie looked at me directly and asked if I was prepared to testify and potentially send my mother and sister to prison. The room spun as the weight of that hit me. Michael grabbed my hand as I nodded yes. Robert showed up at our apartment the next week, looking like he'd aged 10 years. His divorce from Karen was final, and he'd started seeing a therapist twice a week. He sat at our kitchen table and apologized for 30 years of enabling Susan's behavior and favoritism toward Jessica. He admitted he'd always known it was wrong, but chose the easy path of avoiding conflict. He cried when he told me he should have protected me better. 3 months after the baby shower, I was sitting in a deposition room answering questions about every incident when pain shot through my abdomen. The lawyer kept asking questions while I gripped the table edge. Another contraction hit harder. Michael jumped up as I doubled over. The stenographer called 911 while I tried to breathe through contractions that were coming fast. At the hospital, Dr. Martinez worked quickly to stop the labor with IV medication. She checked the monitors constantly while explaining that the stress was triggering real labor at only 30 weeks. The twins needed more time. She managed to stop the contractions but warned they could start again any moment. Meanwhile, Sophie's appeal worked and the recusal was granted. A new judge reviewed everything and immediately threw out Jessica's restraining order against me. He issued bench warrants for both Jessica and Susan for violating the original protection order. Justice finally seemed possible after months of their games, but Dr. Martinez insisted on complete hospital bed rest for the rest of my pregnancy. I spent my days in that sterile room watching the twins' heartbeats on monitors. Through a fake Instagram account, I watched Jessica post about being a victim of persecution and how the system was against her. She seemed completely detached from reality, living in some fantasy where she'd done nothing wrong. Did Jessica really write "Destroy Emily" over and over for 20 whole pages? That's such a strange thing to do. I wonder if she was trying to work through her feelings, or if something deeper was happening in her mind when she wrote all Michael brought news that made everything more complicated. His company was transferring him to Seattle with a big promotion and full relocation assistance. After everything that had happened, they wanted him in a different office. He held my hand as we talked about leaving Buffalo behind and starting fresh $3,000 me from my family. Part of me felt relief at the thought of escape, but another part felt sad about running away. 2 days later, Jessica showed up at the hospital claiming she wanted to apologize. Security stopped her at the elevator, but she managed to scream loud enough for the whole floor to hear that she hoped my babies would die just like our relationship had. 3 nurses witnessed it, and security had to physically remove her. Sophie added witness intimidation to the growing list of charges when she heard about it. James showed up at my hospital window 14 weeks after that crazy baby shower with his daughter wrapped in a pink blanket. Baby Serafina was so tiny and perfect with these little fingers that grabbed at the air while she slept. He held her up to the glass so I could see her face better, and mouthed that he'd filed for divorce. The papers were already signed, and he was moving to his mom's place in Rochester to raise her away from all this mess. I pressed my hand against the window and watched them leave. This innocent baby who had no idea what her mom had done. Sophie called the next morning to tell me the district attorney was taking over our case completely. They were combining everything into one big criminal case against both Jessica and my mom for the kidnapping thing alone. We weren't just dealing with a lawsuit anymore, but actual felony charges that could mean real prison time. Sophie explained we'd have to testify as witnesses in a criminal trial now, not just some civil case. The arraignment was set for Tuesday morning, and I watched the news coverage from my hospital bed. Mom stood there in an orange jumpsuit next to Jessica while the judge read the charges. Then Mom grabbed her chest and collapsed right there in the courtroom. The bailiffs rushed over and started CPR while Jessica screamed at the cameras that I was killing our mother. They rushed Mom out on a stretcher, and the news said she'd had a massive heart attack. Despite everything she'd done to me, I felt this weird pain in my chest watching them work on her. Robert showed up at my room an hour later, looking completely exhausted from running between floors. Mom was stable but in critical condition 2 floors below me in the cardiac unit. He said she kept asking for me and claiming she'd had some kind of revelation about everything. Michael shook his head and told Robert there was no way I was going near her after what she'd pulled. But I kept thinking about her lying there 2 floors down, maybe dying, and something in me cracked. I told the nurse I wanted to see her, but only with security guards present. They wheeled me down in a wheelchair with 2 guards walking beside us. Mom looked so small in that hospital bed with all the tubes and monitors beeping around her. Her face was gray, and she'd aged 10 years in the past few weeks. She reached for my hand with her shaky fingers and started crying. She said she'd been living through Jessica because she was jealous that I'd made something of myself without her help. The words didn't fix anything, but hearing her actually admit it was something I never thought would happen. 2 weeks later, I was back in my room at 32 weeks pregnant, watching the local news run our family story for the 100th time. The headline, "Buffalo Family Feud Turns Criminal," scrolled across the bottom while they showed photos from Jessica's Instagram. I rubbed my huge belly and realized my twins would someday Google their family and find all this crap online forever. The thought made me want to throw up more than the morning sickness ever had. That's when the news anchor mentioned something about leaked documents from Jessica's psychiatric evaluation. The report showed she'd been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder and postpartum psychosis. Her lawyer was already changing their whole defense to claim she was insane when everything happened. James texted me that he was using the diagnosis to get full custody of Serafina permanently. Laura showed up the next day with balloons and a small cake, saying she'd planned a Doover baby shower right there in my hospital room. Just our close friends came, maybe 10 people total, and we sat around eating cake and opening presents without any drama. Everyone talked about the nursery Michael had set up in our new Seattle apartment and how perfect it would be for starting fresh. The twins' room was painted soft yellow with 2 cribs already assembled and waiting for us. Michael never left my side through any of it, sleeping in that uncomfortable chair next to my bed every single night. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning to hear him whispering to my belly about all the parks in Seattle and the good schools near our apartment. He'd already researched everything from pediatricians to baby music classes, and had this whole plan for our new life mapped out. His voice was the only thing keeping me sane while we waited for the legal stuff to wrap up. Then 2 weeks later, all hell broke loose again when Jessica somehow escaped from her psychiatric hold. The news said she'd convinced an orderly she was having a medical emergency and slipped out during shift change. Security footage showed her stealing a kitchen knife from the hospital cafeteria before heading to the elevators. She made it to the maternity ward entrance screaming my name and waving the knife around. 3 security guards tackled her before she could get past the locked doors, but not before she'd terrified a bunch of new moms and visitors. The whole floor went on lockdown for 2 hours while police arrested her. And this time, the judge ordered her held without bail. The prosecutor called me 2 days later to say they were fast-tracking the trial because of all the knife stuff and my high-risk pregnancy. Sophie, the assistant prosecutor, came to my hospital room with boxes of papers and a laptop to prep me for testifying. She showed me pictures of the evidence they had, including videos from the baby shower, witness statements from everyone at the party, and screenshots of Jessica's social media posts threatening me. The whole prep took 3 hours with Sophie asking me about every single time Jessica had ruined my big moments going back to when we were kids. James showed up the next afternoon carrying Serafina, who was wearing a tiny pink dress with ducks on it. He sat in the chair next to my bed and shifted the baby to one arm while pulling out his phone to show me pictures of her nursery. After about 10 minutes of small talk, He asked if Michael and I would be Sarah's godparents if anything happened to him. He said he knew things were crazy, but he wanted his daughter to know her cousins when they were born and have family who actually cared about her. Michael squeezed my hand and we both said yes, even though my chest felt tight, thinking about how broken everything had become. 3 days later, Dr. Martinez came in during her morning rounds and circled a date on the calendar hanging on my wall. She said 34 weeks was as far as she was comfortable letting me go with all the stress, and the twins were big enough to do fine. The C-section was set for next Thursday, which meant my babies would arrive right in the middle of Jessica's trial. I spent that whole night staring at that red circle on the calendar, feeling like the universe had some sick sense of timing. The morning of my testimony, Sophie set up the video equipment in my hospital room while a nurse checked my blood pressure every 10 minutes. The judge's face appeared on the laptop screen first, then the jury box, and finally the defense table where Jessica sat in an orange jumpsuit staring straight ahead. Sophie had warned me not to look at her, but I couldn't help it and saw her lips moving like she was talking to herself. The prosecutor asked me to describe the baby shower incident, and I told them everything from the cake knife to the vomiting to her screaming about it being her day. Then he asked about our childhood, and I listed every recital, graduation, birthday, and achievement she'd sabotaged with fake medical emergencies or dramatic scenes. The jury members kept glancing at each other and writing notes while one woman in the front row had her hand over her mouth. When they asked about the pregnancy announcement, Jessica suddenly looked up and our eyes met through the screen for just a second before she went back to muttering. Robert visited that evening with a box of old VHS tapes he'd converted to digital in his laptop. We watched videos from when Jessica and I were little before everything went bad, playing dress-up and having tea parties in the backyard. There was one where she was teaching me to ride a bike, running beside me, and cheering when I finally got my balance. Michael held me while I cried, watching the sister I'd lost somewhere along the way to jealousy and mental illness. Mom took the stand 2 days later, and Sophie texted me updates since I couldn't watch. She admitted to hitting me at the shower and told the court she'd always favored Jessica because she was prettier and more outgoing. The prosecutor asked if she'd noticed Jessica's pattern of disrupting my events, and Mom said she thought I was being dramatic about it. But when they showed her the timeline of every incident mapped out on a board, even she had to admit it looked planned. Mom begged the judge to send Jessica to treatment instead of prison, saying she was sick, not evil. But the prosecutor pointed out that understanding right from wrong meant she was responsible for her choices. The next morning, they played the baby shower videos for the jury, and Sophie said several people looked sick watching it. What makes someone decide to wave a knife around in a hospital maternity ward? The way Jessica tricked that orderly shows she was thinking clearly enough to plan her escape, but then lost all control when she got close to Emily's floor. The knife threat was bad enough, but the way Jessica had smiled while holding it made it worse. When they got to the part where she screamed about it being her day, she suddenly stood up in court yelling that I'd doctored the footage. The judge ordered her to sit down, but she kept screaming that I'd paid someone to edit the videos until the baifs had to physically remove her from the courtroom. Laura stopped by that afternoon with 2 tiny outfits, soft yellow blankets, and a photo album she'd been putting together. She'd asked everyone we knew to write messages for the twins, and collected them all with pictures of Michael and me throughout my pregnancy. Reading through the well wishes from friends, co-workers, and even some of the nurses made me realize how much love these babies had waiting for them despite all the chaos. James testified the following day, and the prosecutor had him bring a cardboard box to the witness stand. Inside was a notebook they'd found in Jessica's closet titled Operation Destroy Emily, with entries dating back to high school. He read pages out loud describing detailed plans to ruin my prom, my college acceptance celebration, my engagement party, and dozens of other events. Some entries had drawings of me crying, or lists of ways to upstage me at different occasions. Even Mom looked shocked when they showed close-ups of the pages on the courtroom screens. According to Sophie's texts, James's voice cracked when he read an entry from right after my wedding, where Jessica wrote about wanting to burn my dress or put something in my food to make me sick. The prosecutor asked him about finding the notebook, and James said he'd discovered it while packing up their apartment after her arrest. During his testimony about the baby shower itself, Jessica started screaming from her seat that the baby wasn't his, and she'd prove it. She yelled that she'd kill everyone who betrayed her, including me, the babies, James, and anyone who took my side. The judge ordered her removed, but she kept screaming threats until 4 baifs dragged her out while she tried to bite one of them. The judge immediately ordered a psychiatric evaluation and said she'd be held at the state mental facility until further notice. 2 weeks later, the judge made it official and declared Jessica couldn't stand trial because she was too sick mentally. The court sent her to the state hospital for treatment that could take years. Susan's case went forward on its own since she was mentally fine, just mean. Michael held my hand tight when we heard the news in our apartment. We both knew this was just the start of a long road ahead. The next morning, my doctor scheduled my C-section for exactly 35 weeks, since the twins weren't growing enough inside me anymore. Michael and I spent that last night before surgery, lying in the hospital bed together, talking about how we'd raise our babies away from all this crazy family stuff. We promised each other we'd break the cycle and give them normal childhoods full of love, not drama and fights. When they wheeled me into surgery the next morning, Michael suited up in scrubs and held my hand behind the curtain while they cut me open. At 7:23 a.m., our son was born, 3 lb and crying loud. At 7:24 a.m., our daughter followed, even smaller, but fighting hard. Michael cried when he held them for the first time, these tiny, perfect babies we'd made together. Through the recovery room window, I saw Robert standing in the hallway with tears running down his face, finally getting to be a grandfather to babies who might actually know him. The nurses took our twins straight to NICU where they'd need help breathing and eating for a while. 3 days after the birth, Robert came to visit with news about Susan's trial. She'd been convicted of assault and harassment, but only got 2 years probation and mandatory therapy sessions. The judge banned her from contacting us unless we reached out first, which we never would. Robert said she was finally starting to accept what she'd done wrong, but I didn't care about her redemption story. A week later, Sophie brought mail to the NICU while I was holding my tiny son against my chest for skin-to-skin time. The letter was from Jessica's psychiatric facility, and my hands shook as I opened it. She'd written to apologize, but also to announce she was pregnant again with James's baby from before their separation. James showed up an hour later, completely broken by the news that he'd be tied to Jessica forever now through 2 kids. The twins stayed in NICU for 3 full weeks, learning to breathe and eat on their own while getting stronger every day. Laura visited daily with updates on our Seattle house preparations, showing me photos of the nursery she'd painted soft yellow with clouds on the ceiling. She'd found us a great neighborhood with good schools and normal families who didn't assault each other at baby showers. Sophie filed all the legal paperwork to make our move protected, transferring the restraining orders to Washington State, where the stalking laws were stronger. She made sure Jessica couldn't follow us or send people after us once we left Buffalo. On the twins' second week in NICU, James brought Serafina to meet her new cousins through the glass window. He held his daughter up so she could see the tiny babies in their incubators, and she pressed her little hands against the glass, saying babies over and over. Watching James gently explain to Sarah that these were her cousins made me see what kind of father he could have been in a different life without Jessica's poison. He promised me he'd keep Jessica away from us, that he'd handle her visits with Serafina so we'd never have to see her again. 2 days before the twins were supposed to be discharged, Jessica's psychiatric team called with urgent news. She'd become completely fixated on my twins during her treatment sessions, telling everyone they were actually her babies that I'd stolen. The delusions were getting worse despite the medication, and she'd tried to escape twice to come find us. The psychiatrist strongly recommended we leave Buffalo immediately once the babies could travel. At exactly 3 weeks old, the twins finally hit their weight goals and could maintain their body temperature without the incubators. As Michael signed the discharge paperwork, Robert arrived with news that Karen had pleaded guilty to the HIPAA violations for accessing my medical records. She got 6 months in jail and lost her nursing license forever. Another domino falling in the chain of consequences from that baby shower. Our last night in Buffalo came 3 days later, and Laura had somehow pulled together a goodbye dinner at her place with the few family members still talking to us. Robert handed us a thick photo album filled with pictures from before everything went crazy back when we were all just kids playing in the backyard without knowing what was coming. He promised to visit Seattle once we got settled. The twins slept through most of the dinner in their car seats while people took turns holding them and crying. Laura made my favorite lasagna and kept refilling everyone's wine glasses, even though nobody was really drinking. The next morning at Buffalo Airport, I was pushing the double stroller through security when I saw her. Jessica stood near Gate 12 with some kind of medical aid beside her, wearing sweatpants and a hoodie I'd never seen before. Her face looked puffy from medication, and her hands shook as she held a coffee cup. She saw us at the exact same moment I saw her. Her whole face just crumpled like paper, and she mouthed something that looked like, "I'm sorry," before the aide turned her around and led her away toward a different gate. That was the last time I ever saw my sister. On the plane, I nursed both twins while Michael scrolled through Seattle neighborhood listings on his phone. An older woman across the aisle kept smiling at us, and finally leaned over to say we had beautiful babies and what a lovely family we made. She had no idea we were basically refugees fleeing our hometown. When we landed in Seattle, my phone exploded with messages from Sophie. Jessica had been committed involuntarily for at least 6 months after she'd threatened to find us and take what she called her babies. James was filing for permanent custody of both kids since she'd been declared unfit. The legal battles would keep going without us there. Our new house in Seattle was perfect with its big windows and quiet street, but I couldn't relax. Every doorbell made me jump. I checked the locks 3 times before bed and studied every face at the park like they might be someone Jessica sent. Michael found us a family therapist who specialized in trauma and made our first appointment for the following week. Robert called 2 weeks later with updates about Mom. She'd started therapy and was finally accepting how she'd enabled Jessica's behavior for years. She'd written us a long letter that Robert offered to read over the phone. It was actually remorseful stressful, talking about how she'd failed both her daughters by playing favorites and creating this competition between us. A month into Seattle life, the twins smiled for the first time during a video call with Laura. Real smiles, not just gas. Laura started crying immediately. Then I was crying. Then Michael was crying. All of us just sobbing at these two tiny babies grinning at a phone screen. These perfect moments reminded me why we'd fought so hard to protect them. Then Sophie called with news that made my stomach drop. Jessica had lost the pregnancy during what they called a psychotic episode, where she'd tried to cut the baby out herself because she believed aliens had put it there. They'd moved her to a long-term psychiatric facility upstate. Even after everything she'd done, I felt sick thinking about her lost baby and her broken mind. James decided to move to Portland with Serafina and his new girlfriend. Close enough for the cousins to grow up knowing each other, but far enough from Buffalo's poison. How did Jessica manage to see them at the airport if she was supposed to be in treatment? The timing feels so strange. Her standing there with a medical aid right when they're leaving town forever. We agreed to meet up once a month for playdates, trying to build something healthy from all this wreckage. 3 months into our Seattle life, the final legal papers arrived by certified mail. All criminal charges resolved with plea deals or convictions. The restraining orders made permanent. Our Buffalo house sold to a nice young couple who had no idea about its history. The last document confirmed Jessica would remain institutionalized indefinitely after being declared a danger to herself and others. The war was over, but nobody had really won anything. Going back to work felt weird after everything. The office building downtown had glass doors that reflected my face back at me, and for a second, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Michael stayed home with the twins while I sat at my desk answering emails about marketing campaigns and quarterly reports. My coworkers talked about their weekend plans and complained about traffic, and nobody knew about the viral video or the knife or any of it. During lunch breaks, I pumped milk in the bathroom and checked my phone for pictures Michael sent of the babies. 3 weeks into the job, my manager asked if I wanted to join the team for drinks, and I actually said yes. Sitting in that bar listening to normal people talk about normal problems felt like wearing a costume that finally fit. My therapist's office had beige walls and a white noise machine that made ocean sounds. I sat on her couch picking at the throw pillow while she waited for me to speak. The words stuck in my throat for 20 minutes before I finally said it out loud. I got pregnant on purpose to hurt my sister. Not for love or wanting a family, but for revenge. The therapist didn't look shocked or disgusted, just nodded and asked how that made me feel now. Empty, I told her. Empty and guilty and somehow still angry. She said healing meant accepting all the ugly parts of how we got here. 6 months in Seattle meant the twins were turning 1. And Robert called, asking if he could visit. I almost hung up, but Michael grabbed the phone and said yes before I could stop him. Robert showed up at our door holding a wrapped box and looking older than I remembered. He handed me the gift without meeting my eyes and said, "Susan made it but couldn't come herself." Inside was a quilt made from fabric scraps in every shade of blue and green. Tucked into the corner was a small envelope with Susan's handwriting. I didn't open it. Not then. Robert played with the twins for an hour, helped them blow out their birthday candles, then left without asking for anything more. The quilt went in the closet, but not the trash. Laura called 2 months later, saying she got a job offer in Seattle. Within a week, she had an apartment 3 blocks away and was at our place every evening after work. She brought takeout and held the babies while Michael and I ate with both hands for once. The twins reached for her whenever she walked in, and she started keeping diapers and formula at her place just in case. James visited too, bringing his new girlfriend who didn't know our history, and just saw us as James's normal sister with a normal family. We had game nights and barbecues, and nobody mentioned Buffalo or baby showers or anything from before. 8 months in Seattle felt like the right time for something we should have done differently the first time. Michael suggested it while we were washing dishes, just casual like he was mentioning the weather. We could renew our vows, he said. Do it right this time. Just us and the people who actually matter. No big production or competition or family drama. I kissed him with soapy hands and said yes. The ceremony happened in our backyard with Laura, James, his girlfriend, and baby Serafina, who Laura was babysitting for the afternoon. James's girlfriend recorded it on her phone while the twins tried to eat the flowers Laura picked from her garden. Michael wrote his own vows about choosing each other every day, especially the hard days. I just said I loved him and meant it. After everyone left, we put the twins to bed and slow danced in the kitchen to no music at all. A letter came from Jessica's treatment facility 9 months after we left Buffalo. The doctor's handwriting explained she had been making progress with therapy and medication. She had written apology letters to everyone as part of her treatment. Would we consider supervised video contact in the future? The letter went into the filing cabinet in the folder marked important papers between the twins' birth certificates and our car insurance. Maybe someday I'd answer it. Today wasn't that day. The twins took their first steps on the same rainy Tuesday while I was folding laundry. First, one twin stood up using the coffee table. Then the other saw and had to copy. They wobbled toward each other and collapsed in a pile of giggles. Michael said something about them already competing, And we both froze. Then he laughed and said, competition could be good, like who could give the best hugs or be the kindest. We were writing new rules for our family. Some nights I dreamed about Jessica, but not the woman who held the knife. I dreamed about the sister who taught me to ride my bike in the driveway, the one who split her Halloween candy with me, even though I dropped mine in a puddle, the girl who existed before everything went wrong. I woke up crying from those dreams, grieving someone who might have only existed in my memories. Michael held me without asking questions because some pain doesn't need words. 1 year in Seattle meant 1 year since the baby shower. I posted a single photo on Instagram of the twins laughing at the park. The caption read, "The best revenge is a life well lived," and I turned off comments before anyone could respond. Some stories didn't need audiences anymore. The park near our house had baby swings and a sandbox where the twins could dig for hours. Michael pushed them while I sat on the bench with my coffee, watching our little family that we built from chaos. A woman sat down next to me and commented on how calm and happy we all looked together. For the first time, I believed her. The twins would know their story someday when they were old enough to understand that families can break and heal and break and heal again. They'd know about their aunt and their grandparents and why we lived so far from where Mommy and Daddy grew up. But today, they just knew that Daddy made airplane noises when he pushed them high, and Mommy always had goldfish crackers in her purse, and their world was safe and small and full of love. That was enough. That was everything. That's it for today. Thanks for exploring all these questions with me. What a ride just wondering about stuff together. See you next time. Subscribe for more content like